The Preakness field has been drawn. Let's talk about the second leg of the Triple Crown, and let's take a first look. Salutations and welcome, friends. I'm your host to this Preakness First Look episode. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Make sure to check out all of our great content that we have here on Trust the Profits. Press that subscribe button for all your Triple Crown needs, all your summer racing needs, all your fall racing needs. We got you covered through the Breeders' Cup, Keeneland in the fall, Saratoga in the summer. We got you covered frontwards, backwards, every way you can imagine here in horse racing, your one-stop shop. Trust the Profits. Make sure to like this video and comment below with who you think is going to win the 148th running of the Preakness Stakes. Well, on Monday afternoon at the Guinness Brewery in Baltimore, they drew the field for the 148th Preakness Stakes, and I'm going to be giving you a first look, an early preview of this particular race, and give you some metrics on some different dynamics that I think are going to be very critical when you're thinking about handicapping this race and picking and betting this particular race. So let's dive straight into the field itself and talk a little bit about this Preakness Stakes field. Obviously, a field of 8. There's been a lot of narratives about the fact that only one horse from the Kentucky Derby has returned to run in the second leg of the Triple Crown. Is that, and of course, the winning horse from the Kentucky Derby, Mage. None of the other 19 horses who finished 2nd through 20th have opted to come and run in Baltimore. Disarm, the Steve Asmussen horse, is the latest to, I don't want to say scratch, but withdraw his name from consideration. That happened. That news came out on Monday morning. Confidence Game, another horse that was initially pointed towards the Preakness, also decided to drop out before the field was drawn. But we have this field of 8 on the inside rail. We have National Treasure for Bob Baffert with John Velasquez aboard, is getting blinkers added and has that inside rail draw 4-1 on the morning line. Chase the Chaos, real long shot. Local jockey Sheldon Russell, the husband of Mid-Atlantic trainer Brittany Russell, is going to be riding for Ed Mosier Jr. This is a horse that qualified for the Preakness Stakes by winning the El Camino Real Derby out at Golden Gate Fields back in February, actually. Then you have Mage drawing the number 3 hole for Gustavo Delgado with Javier Castellano aboard. He is, of course, your morning line favorite at 8-5. Coffee with Chris, another local horse, John Salzman Jr., local trainer with Jamie Rodriguez up on the mount, 20-1 on the morning line. Then everybody's favorite closer, Red Route 1, breaking from the 5 hole for Steve Asmussen with Joel Rosario aboard. Talk about a jockey who fits a horse's running style like a glove. 10-1. This is a horse coming off a victory last time out, actually. And so that was in the Bathhouse Row Stakes at Oaklawn Park. Then you have a horse that is familiar to the Mid-Atlantic, but it's kind of traveled all over. Perform, coming out of the number 6 hole for Shug McGahee. Fergal Lynch is taking the mount. And if you have not gone back and watched the Tessio Stakes at Laurel Park, which Perform won last time out, you will have an understanding of why Fergal Lynch is still the jockey on this horse. That was one of the most amazing rides you will ever see, and one of the most thrilling finishes to a race you will ever see. Just brilliant tactician weaving through traffic. So Shug rewarding Fergal Lynch for a great ride here, 15-1 for a horse that has run against some really nice competition at the maiden special weight level. And then you have Blazing Sevens for Chad Brown with Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard, is the 4th choice on the board at 6-1. And then the 2nd choice on the board on the far outside, First Mission for Brad Cox with Louis Saez on the mount. So this is your field. And I think it's kind of an interesting field. Obviously, not a lot of horses in the race, only 8. A lot of people have made comments about that. And listen, we've had some videos on here talking about the impact that this might have on the Triple Crown, talking about the dynamics of the Triple Crown. But there are still nice horses in this race, even though you might say, well, there's some also rans. You know, these were the kind of the junior varsity horses that weren't able to make the Kentucky Derby. Red Route 1's a nice horse who's finished 2nd in multiple Kentucky Derby prep races and just finally got a stakes win last time out. You have a horse like First Mission that just matured a little too late to be on the Derby trail. If this horse had broken his maiden 2-3 months earlier, probably would have been on the Derby trail and probably would have made the Kentucky Derby starting gate, but was a horse that took a little bit longer to develop. Cox made sure not to rush this horse too much in terms of development and getting him to the track. He's done nothing wrong since going to the track. Lost to Bishop's Bay in debut, but we just saw Bishop's Bay run a huge race in the Peter Pan over the weekend, and then goes and wins the Lexington Grade 3 last time out. Is going to be a little bit more fresh than certainly a horse like Mage coming off that 2-week layoff. So that's a nice horse. Blazing Sevens has some backclass. Winner of the Grade 1 Champagne last year. Ran a 4th place in the Juvenile Breeders' Cup back in November. Ran 3rd in that Lexington. I think, he's an interesting horse. I'm not completely sold on Blazing Sevens, but I think that there's a lot of buzz about that horse. Great final workout with Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard. Irad making sure to kind of take him out on the workout track on Saturday morning. So that was one where that workout got a little bit of buzz, certainly looked very fresh in that workout. But it's interesting when you look at this field, one of the things that really stood out to me is the complete lack of pace in this particular race. And so this just kind of, I think, shows this a little bit to you in a few different ways. So this is using Timeform US early late pace indicators and early late pace speed indicators. So what you'll see there is on the first column, you'll see that early Timeform pace figure. And then in the second column, the late Timeform pace figure. What you see, and then you have also, I should mention in the final column, the running type that Timeform US applies to these different horses. You'll see that Coffee with Chris is the horse with the best early Timeform pace figure, and he is typified as a leader, a horse that likes to go out front and likes to set the pace. Behind him, there are 2 obvious candidates in terms of First Mission and National Treasure. National Treasure breaking from that inside rail with blinkers on, you figure is going to be very forwardly placed and might just go for the lead. But outside of those 3 horses, there's not much else in terms of pace in this race. Everyone else likes to sit mid-pack. Multiple horses like to close. You have Red Route 1, who they consider a plotter, but has the biggest late speed figure number in the field. You have Blazing Sevens that likes to close. Mage has not been getting away from the gate that well. Now, if he gets away from the gate a little bit better, will probably be more forwardly positioned and probably sitting 4th or 5th, but depends on how that gate issue plays out. Breaking from the 3rd hole, I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. I think that'll suit him just fine. Chase the Chaos, I know they have him here as a mid-pack horse. You watch his races, he's far more of a closer, I would say, than a mid-pack horse. And then a horse like Perform, interestingly enough, they also have categorized as mid-pack. If you go back and watch that last race, the Tessio, very much so a closer in that last race. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because I think there's going to be a very clear distinction of who's going to be setting the pace with National Treasure and Coffee with Chris. And then I think First Mission, breaking from that far outside post, is going to be happy to cross and clear a lot of horses and probably be sitting off the flank of a horse like Coffee with Chris or off the flank of a horse like National Treasure and sitting 2nd or 3rd, potentially, depending on how the pace sets up. But you don't have a lot of horses that need the lead. I think that's one of the things that's really important to point out. First Mission does not need the lead. National Treasure does not need the lead. He will be sent from that inside rail with Johnny Velasquez aboard for sure, but should Coffee with Chris get him into the first turn, it's not the end of the world. That's actually National Treasure's typical race, is that he typically does sit around 3rd most of the time when he runs. So there's kind of a very clear hierarchy in terms of how this pace plays out. And even Steve Asmussen, if you don't believe me, ask Steve Asmussen. He's only the winningest trainer in North America. He even indicated he's concerned with the lack of pace for Red Route 1. He did say he thinks Red Route 1 is a horse that will benefit from all of the distance you want to give him. That certainly was true when we did our Spotlight series on him, looking at that pedigree. That would make you think Red Route 1 could run for days. But he needs to have a little bit of pace to run into. There might not be a ton of early speed in this particular race, and the horses might get out there on the front end and just be able to set very reasonable fractions because you don't have a lot of other horses pressing them. So I think that's a very intriguing dynamic that exists. And the other thing that we, talk about a lot of times on here, and Colin Sheehan, my co-host a lot of times on these, couldn't make it this evening, but one of the things he always likes to do is look at Brisnet prime power ratings. And so interestingly enough, when you look at the Preakness Stakes Brisnet scores, you see that Mage, not surprisingly, is your top prime power number. And then there's about a 6-point gap back to First Mission and National Treasure. And then another little bit of a gap to Blazing Sevens. And then in Red Route 1, Coffee with Chris, Chase the Chaos, and Perform. Listen, Mage is the class of this field, no doubt about it. I did a little bit of digging, I did a little bit of research, and only four times since 2006 has a horse outside of the top three won the Preakness in terms of prime power rankings. Typically, when you look historically at the Preakness Stakes, your winner is coming from one, two, or three. And actually, I should say only three times since 2006. Okay. And one of those, we should point out, was in 2006. And that was the year, of course, Barbaro had the terrible injury. And Bernardini won that race. No disrespect to Bernardini, but I think there's a little bit of an asterisk there. So it's very uncommon to see horses outside of the top three in terms of Brisnet Prime Power rankings win the Preakness Stakes. Does not happen very often. So the fact that you should kind of be looking at those top three, Mage, First Mission, and National Treasure, that's really where you're looking. Now, from a speed, figure, and pace standpoint, this kind of Brisnet kind of plays things out very similarly to the way Timeform US sees it. First Mission, National Treasure, Coffee with Chris. Those are the only horses that show any type of speed. Everyone else is an S, an S3, a P. They're not forwardly placed horses. And even when you look at First Mission and Coffee with Chris is clearly the EP7, First Mission's EP6, and National Treasure's EP4. Now, National Treasure might go a little bit more because of the blinkers, because of the inside rail, but these are horses that are, like I said, naturally kind of going to be in their best spot in terms of on the lead, tracking, and then everybody else is going to be sitting a little bit further back. Now, one of the things that you might remember from last year, if you watched Pimlico and the Preakness Day at all, is that the track was very, very favorable to early front end speed. And that was one of those days where I remember going to the track on Saturday at the Preakness last year. And I remember watching some of the early races on the undercard. And there was a sprint race in particular. I forget the exact name of the race, and I forget all of the, I think Lightning Larry might have won that one, that particular race. But they went insane on the front end. Now, granted, it's a sprint, but they were going like 44, maybe 40. They were going really, really fast on the front end. And when you looked up at the tote board, you thought, okay, well, this pace is going to collapse, and the horses that are sitting fourth or fifth are going to kind of come and get these two, because there were two horses on the front end that were just kind of dueling each other and setting really fast fractions that you just didn't think could be sustained, even in a 7 furlong sprint. And son of a gun, if those two did not finish 1-2 in that race, and you go, wow, okay, so this is one of those days where early speed is going to be really tough to beat. And that's kind of the way Pimlico plays. And if you've watched Pimlico opening weekend, guess what? Early speed was kind of the name of the game on the dirt. I think 4 of the 6 winners on opening day sat first or second at second call. I think 5 of 9 sat first or second at second call on Saturday. And that was skewed a little bit because they took some races off turf and then moved, turf races onto the dirt and things like that. So it is, one of those things where, like I said, it's fascinating to see how the track might manipulate things. And I think that's a concern for Mage. If you are a horse like Mage, certainly a horse like Red Route 1, Blazing Sevens, those types, Chase the Chaos, just dead closers or mid-pack horses, you have to look at this track and go, this is setting up very nicely for Coffee with Chris, who I don't think is a legitimate threat to win, First Mission, and National Treasure. And I particularly the latter two. This race sets up really nicely for them. There's not a ton of pace. There's not a ton of pressure. The track is probably going to hold up front end speed really, really well. And the horses coming from behind are going to be fighting you as much as they're fighting the track. And so they have kind of two obstacles to overcome, whereas you just need to worry about yourself on the front end. Very interesting dynamic, I think. And something to keep in mind, something I would encourage you to pay attention to on Black Eyed Susan Day on Friday, early on the undercard on Saturday as well. How is this track playing? Is it holding up front end speed? Looking for that speed bias, I think, is going to be critically important. Looking at how the rail holds up in some instances, but really it is about that speed bias, I think, at Pimlico on big days. They are known for kind of souping this track up. So make sure to pay attention to that factor in this particular race. Now, one of the other things we like to look at is horses that are coming in good form. And so this is looking at Brisnet speed figures last time out and their most recent efforts. And so what you can see is the nice part is a lot of these horses are actually coming in with their best form, that their last race was their best race. Certainly Mage, First Mission, even Blazing Sevens, Perform, Red Route 1, all coming in with their best race being their last race. Now, when you look at these figures, obviously in terms of career bests, National Treasure, Mage, First Mission. Listen, we keep talking about these three same horses, and this race should be a race that Mage can handle. We looked at the prime power rankings. He's got the advantage. If he gets away cleanly from the gate, even moderately so, the fact that there are so many closers in this race, he should be sitting fourth, which is not a bad place for him to be sitting. That's, I think, a perfectly good spot for him to be. He should be, I don't think he would have to fight with the track bias too much in that perspective. Now, there's also something that everybody always loves talking about, which is the tight turns of Pimlico. All right. That Pimlico supposedly has tighter turns than other tracks, and the centrifugal force can end up impacting a horse. It depends on the horse. It depends on the type of trip they like to run. It depends on their running style, I think, a great deal. Is it going to be a little harder for them to make a move going around the third and fourth turn? Maybe a little bit, but it doesn't strike me as something that would be a disqualifying effect on a horse like Mage that might be sitting, like I said, a decent trip in fourth. Certainly, you looked in the Preakness Stakes, yes, Javier Castellano absolutely got Mage in a good position coming out of the far turn, but then Mage really accelerated coming down the stretch and was able to, obviously pass a tiring two fills and hold off Angel of Empire, who was also charging late. So smaller field. I don't think anybody's running style is so dynamic that Red Route 1 is probably the horse that would honestly be the one that's probably most impacted by that, because if he starts winding up around that far turn, that might be difficult for him more than anybody else. I think those deep closers are going to maybe have a little bit more trouble. I think horses on the front end should be relatively okay when we talk about the Preakness and the Pimlico turns. So I think sometimes that can be an overblown factor that people talk about, but it's certainly one to keep in mind. But like I said, I don't see any horse in this race with such an overwhelming running style that it would be disqualifying in terms of those turns at Pimlico. So listen, ultimately, how do we see these types of, how do we see this race kind of playing out? And Colin always has my top pick, top value play sort of thing that I use on Capping the Card. So even though he's not here, I figured I'd throw that graphic up for him. Listen, my top pick is a horse that I'll go out a little bit on a ledge, and I am going to take a flyer on a horse like National Treasure. This is a horse I've been stumping for a while, going back to his 2-year-old campaign. I think the last time out was a sneaky bad trip for National Treasure in the Santa Anita Derby. I think he actually ran better that day than people realize. He also was coming off a little bit of a layoff that day, and that's why I think his speed figures were maybe a little bit lower, depending on what source you use. I think the inside rail and the blinkers are good additions for him. I think the way the pace sets up in this race is a good addition for him. Bob Baffert, his trainer, has won this race 7 times, a record. He would tying a record. He's looking for the record-setting 8th time with National Treasure. So I'll take a shot with National Treasure here. I don't feel hugely confident about that. It's not like I'm taking money to the bank there. I think Mage is going to run a huge race. I think First Mission is going to run a huge race. Quite frankly, getting beyond those top 3, actually, I find to be rather difficult. If I am going to pick a horse that presents a little bit of value, listen, I'd be foolish not to pick a horse like Red Route 1 at 10-1. This is a horse that just always seems to run up into the exacta, always seems to run up into the trifecta no matter what. He's going to come running late. You absolutely know where he is throughout. So, he's a horse that I think does present some decent value at 10-1 at least. I'm not as sold on Blazing Sevens at 6-1. So you then jump to that next level of horse. At 10-1, I think, like I said, Red Route 1 makes some sense. I think you even look at a horse, if you really want to take a little bit more of a flyer, a horse like Perform at 15-1 might be worth a shot. I think he's a horse that might be worth including underneath, certainly in exactas and trifectas. Again, go back and watch that Tessio Stakes, one of the more impressive finishes you're going to see, and a horse that it just seems like it took forever to break his maiden, and he ran against really, really good company. Perform did leading up to finally breaking his maiden. He ran against a lot of Derby horses in the maiden special weight ranks, finally got a little bit of a softer field at Tampa, broke his maiden, and immediately went and won a stakes race next time out. So he is an ascending horse that might have just needed this. They also paid $150,000 to supplement him in the field. Remember, Ken McPeak and though that ownership group did it with Creative Minister last year, that's a horse that ended up finishing on the board in that particular race. So I think a horse like Perform at 15-1 provides a little bit of value. I ultimately am going to probably be the contrary on the channel, like I said, and pick National Treasure as my top choice. But if I didn't pick him, I think the rest of the guys would probably give me a hard time because, like I said, I've been stumping for National Treasure for about 6 months and they got sick and tired of me talking about it. But I think it's going to be a great race. I think First Mission is a really tough horse to get around in a lot of ways as well. I think those top three are just really, really good. I think it's going to be a rather chalky exacta with maybe a horse like Perform or Red Route 1 running up into the trifecta. I would kind of foresee that. Maybe one of the top three doesn't quite fire, doesn't have a big day. I could see one of those other two running up into it. So that's kind of how I see the Preakness playing out, but very interesting dynamics. We'll continue to have a ton of content here on the channel for you. So make sure to press that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure to like this video, comment below with, hey, who do you like? Let us know your top pick. Let us know your exacta trifecta. How are you betting the 148th Preakness? Well, until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.